I might have a strange way of showing that I really want to go out there and respect other people's opinions and come to an understanding of certain concepts that these commentators and reviewers have out there on the vast, crazy world internet. And in my sort of futile attempt to stay neutral and to explore the philosophy of a lot of these YouTube creators, I come across a lot of weird little things. Now, in this attempt, as misguided as it might seem to even me at times, I came across a rather fascinating channel. Synthetic Man's #1 simp and waifu. And while I might not agree with everything said, it definitely gives me a new perspective on the man that I probably wouldn't have considered just watching his videos on my own. Now, in a futile attempt to sort of maybe bridge the divide between my perspective and someone like Synthetic Man and even Ann Waifu's perspective on media out there, thought I would address some of Synthetic Man, Escapism is Dead.
Thumbnail, this is going to be a somewhat political video, so if that bothers you, now's the time to leave. A big part of the appeal of video games for me and many other people is escaping reality for one reason or another. And as society has made the slow march into making literally everything political, with many people simply telling you that everything is political, yet out of the other side of their mouth also telling me that I'm making things political when everything's political. So figure that one out.
Yeah, it's a catch-22, Synthetic Man. But the devil is in the detail and optics matter. How you craft your message, which admittedly in my case probably comes across as rather off most times, but I believe a sense of humor on the internet can do people wonders.
If they didn't have double standards, they'd have no standards at all, right? So as escapism slowly dies, so does my joy for video games. Though obviously there's many reasons why I've slowly become apathetic over time.
And I can completely understand the apathy that Synthetic Man and other people feel.
So as for escapism, there's obviously a lot of different elements that goes into this, immersion being a big factor. And obviously this entire subject is highly subjective. What bothers me probably doesn't bother most people, which is evident by the countless backlash I've received for complaining about literally anything in video games. Because if you're told something's a masterpiece, it absolutely is, no question.
See, this is where Synthetic Man loses me a bet. He says something reasonable, then he sort of conflates that with something a little ridiculous. It's fucking hyperbolic fun, so I can get into it. Some people will overreact to that statement, but hey, we're all idiots on the internet trying to properly represent our own opinion, and in some cases, our group's opinion. Not me, hopefully not Synthetic Man, if people want you to believe he represents a certain political divide. He's definitely influenced by one side, I will say that for sure, but does that mean he's part of it? I'm not going to make that judgment.
And I do want to address that this is not specifically going to be a Dead Space remake evaluation type of thing. I talked about it for about 5 minutes in my Last of Us Episode 3 review, and I will be retreading a couple of those points for this video, but it's not specifically about that game. There's definitely much more woke games than Dead Space Remake, but it was still bad enough to catch my attention, that's for sure. So let's get to the first point of contention and the one that inspired this video. Modern politics. It's basically impossible to escape progressive ideology in any modern AAA game and in a lot of indie games as well. Worse yet, a lot of leftists and grifters pretending to be centrist or right-leaning attempt to gaslight us by debating what the term woke even means. To me, woke represents any political messaging, subliminal or not, that pushes these modern progressive ideals. This covers a pretty vast spectrum, which is why there's been so much pushback from these so-called centrists.
And why I can perfectly understand why Synthetic Man is sort of making this right centrist sort of grifter claim here. That's definitely going to be an issue for another time. Sort of a greater overarching thing. But now, Synthetic Man, there's a lot of problems here that I see. When you have a broad definition of woke and a lot of things that encompass that, it can come off as crying wolf at every little thing. everything is woke in your opinion, nothing's woke. Optically, it's rather difficult to go through with that. He is correct, there's a lot of progressive politics, as he says, but labeling it as politics, I believe, is a little bit reductive. But society as a whole is reductive, so I can't blame him for seeing it that way. My definition for woke is just simple: when progressive politics pushes too far. My sort of test for this is when the only defense against a certain criticism that's being levied at something is that you're either ist or phobe, sexist, racist, transphobic, bigoted, all that stuff. If that's their only defense, then yes, it is very likely woke.
And look, my personal definition is broad on purpose, because sometimes subliminal messaging is even more important than the stuff vomited in your face.
Subliminal messaging, that is a bit of an exaggeration. I do get what he's saying, but it's more like a conditioning of some type. I would go with classical conditioning. Say you like a game or movie with, some progressive elements and just don't mind them. So you'll start associating those elements with things that you like. It can also, of course, work the other way around too. You play a game or watch a TV show you hate with progressive elements, and you'll start hating most media with those same elements in it. It's not subliminal, but it is psychological conditioning of some type. And you could say it could happen on a subconscious level, at least that's what I believe from my experience in psychology. Now, this is probably why most people can hate woke without knowing what it means.
The thing is, we have now become so used to these devs pushing harder and harder that now when some of the more anticipated games have dialed it back a step or two, people are now pretending it doesn't count as woke anymore, right?
But still, I doubt that even devs include even what I would call woke light in their games for political reasons. The most likely case for this would be either a subconscious or conscious bias in that regards, or to broaden the markability of a certain game in this environment where progressive politics are pushed by advertisers and a whole bunch of other people. And I am sure there's just some cowards out there who just can't stand the thought of being called racist, sexist, homophobic, or anything like that by these spineless mainstream game journos and even the public at large, canceling people on Twitter and other social medias for posts few years ago.
We have become so used to the absurd, nearly parody tier leftist crap like Velma or The Last of Us Part 2 that when something like God of War Ragnarok or the Dead Space remake shows up, people are debating whether or not it's woke at all. Even when those very same changes were done to something like Rings of Power, right? Like race-swapping characters or making some of the female characters absurdly powerful, even better than men.
Now, I don't feel as strong as Synthetic Man about race swapping. I grew up in a multicultural area where actually white people were the minority. No, I'm not saying that race swapping's always a good thing. Sometimes it can be a detriment. Sometimes it can be a plus. So again, unless it really fails that test above, I probably wouldn't care too much about it.
That a lot of people are completely fine with race swapping under certain contexts. I don't really have enough data here to give you an answer as to why this is, but again, something that was complained about with Rings of Power is now completely fine with God of War Ragnarok, despite the fact that they're both based on white culture. And I am in no interest to debate what white means or what culture means.
But I'm not someone who holds too highly on traditional aspects of our culture, probably because I'm a very uncultured individual.
No, what I'm doing is essentially gatekeeping, which of course has a very negative connotation amongst certain groups on the internet, but I think there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. The entire point of gatekeeping is just to ensure that the people in your hobby are the people who actually care about said hobby, the people who are invested in it and have a deep emotional attachment. Not the type of people who are just there to grift or to slowly turn the hobby into what they want instead of just enjoying it for what it is, which has destroyed many, many subcultures over time. That certain people have subverted fan bases or even movements and destroyed them from within.
Now, I'm fine with gatekeeping. Perfectly fine practice to protect certain fandoms, especially in smaller groups. And we have seen the erosion of certain media properties because people didn't gatekeep it properly. Us geeks are very accepted since probably the 70s, 80s. We were the underdogs, outcasts, shit like that. So we just let people come in thinking they would just enjoy the game. Instead, it started getting popular and they sort of wanted to make it about their identity group instead of the joy of the actual geekdom that is expressed. You can replace geek with anything. You can be a geek about anything. It just means you're passionate about things. But I don't think being too emotionally attached to a certain media property is healthy. It's natural that things change and grow over time. This is why I can't really agree with Synthetic Man's Kratos criticism. Because logically, it makes perfect sense that when he became a father, start raising a son, move to a new land, it changes a man in many ways in a completely believable manner. Now, Synthetic Man thought he would be a different type of father, which obviously he joked about. I don't know how true that is. I'm hoping he didn't have that sort of childhood, but let me not get into the psychobabble right now. But just the fatherhood angle can radically change one's worldview. There's also the nostalgia blindness problem. Remember Han Solo? Remember Chewie? Remember? But that doesn't mean you should completely disrespect the past like much of the media loves to do nowadays. Changing things just for the sake of modernization and for the times, and to insult the past by killing it. Good writers can find ways to build on a past and still even subvert it to a certain degree without completely being an asshole about it. But that's just my opinion on it. But seriously, you can have a decent balance between the two. Very few people have the talent to successfully pull off that tightrope act, especially not in the AAA game industry or Hollywood. They're too busy smelling their own farts to actually be concerned with what the pleb fans and audience care about. They'll tell people what they should care about.
Now, the most obvious recent example of this was Forspoken, which I feel like the only reason it was even made is to pad out Square Enix's ESG score. If they hadn't gotten funding from BlackRock, there's no way this would have ever seen the light of day. It's obvious that they had no idea what they actually wanted to make as a game. So seeing as the likely lengthy pre-production hadn't produced anything worthy of making a game, that's where ESG comes along and is like, okay, you need to have a black female protagonist on top of a culturally diverse fantasy world with no explanation as to how those people got there or how a librarian can be morbidly obese, and of course everyone has to be ugly as well. That goes without saying. So we can give you millions of dollars to make this inevitable flop. And so we're given Frey, who is an incredibly sanitized 20-year-old orphan who, if you haven't played the game and only heard clips of her dialogue, you would think, well, she's not a stereotype, at the very least, except for the fact that she's committed 3 felonies, has spent a considerable amount of money on sneakers despite living in a shithole. She works for a gang, and honestly the list goes on. I covered it in my review if you're curious. So it's funny that her dialogue is written more like some kind of quirky Marvel movie mixed with a millennial white woman trying to write what Zoomers are like these days, and it just doesn't work.
I really think that Synthetic Man is overselling the involvement of ESG in the sort of process. But in the case of something like Forspoken, given what I know about the game, he's probably not too far off. Still, the fact that they pretty much just had this awesome game engine that they were working on, and that was probably their primary concern, so they didn't care. They just thought they would slap together a story that would placate Western audiences. clear from the circumstances that it's the engine they wanted to work on and they didn't care about the story as much. So going along with these sort of standards and diversity, why making their game to show off their game engine, which who knows, maybe they were trying to deflect with a brown character as a lead that you can't say bad stuff about that. But that's starting to wear off, in my opinion. Everyone criticized that game. They didn't get the races pass, although some people tried to pull that one. Now, sure, ESG might have played a part in the creative process of this story, but I am surprised he doesn't mention that the half-ass thing of the story that Forspoken tried to tell with its horrible dialogue, even some games journos were trying to defend it just for the woke skin thrown over this poorly thought out game. Plus, many gaming award shows have similar requirements to what he outlined in the diversity checklist. And that is a factor for many different things, especially marketing.
And so to bring this back around to the escapism point, a big problem with this is that isekai stories are almost anti-escapism, at least for me. Conceptually, it should be the opposite, because it's a normal person being brought into some magical world and you get superpowers. And so on the surface level, you think, oh shit, that might actually be the perfect escapist story, because it's made for normies to pretend that they live in a fantasy world and have superpowers. Now here's the problem with that. One, you need to have a blank slate protagonist to make this even feasible. Or at least a protagonist that serves as a male or female power fantasy. So that even though we couldn't picture ourselves literally being this person, at least we can look to them as a sort of idealized version of ourselves, which is how heroes used to be written. Now so many hero characters are horribly flawed, and sometimes those flaws aren't even intentional, to make those characters feel more relatable, where in reality, it feels like the opposite for somebody like me, because I don't want to be this super flawed person. I don't want to be a Mary Sue or a Gary Stu either, but that certainly would be a step up from being completely unlikable.
Now, I think his opinions on isekais and main characters have some merit to them. The only thing I'll say is that it's heavily influenced by his personal preference. Just like how he doesn't like cutscenes in game, but not everyone has that preference of his. Can't criticize a game for that alone. You have to measure the cutscene's quality and other elements. Some people are fine with it. They would be better to critique cutscenes in game than someone heavily biased about them. I understand he doesn't like where games are going with it, but his whining about good cutscenes and bad cutscenes, it goes back to the cry wolf element that he displayed before. He just likes them, no doubt at all, is part of that element there, in my opinion. Just like there are some people who are perfectly fine with walk-in simulators. Not really my cup of tea. But I won't knock them either. I just wouldn't be the best person to review them unless it was phenomenally done and I thought it was good. Now, I do understand his concerns about cutscenes taken away from the gameplay and whatnot. Again, in my opinion, it's all about finding that right balance for the right audience. And yes, it comes down to his subjective opinions on that front. Some people want to escape into the game and not have the control taken away from them. And other people would rather slip into other people's shoes and have a taste of what their life is like. In that sort of case, a cutscene would not bother them if it furthered the understanding of that character you're trying to get into the role for, or a heroic character that you really like, not even getting into the role, just seeing how their story plays out. Other people want to walk, I'm trying not to insult them, but most of them are pretty bad. There are a few that are decent. Still, there are different genres for a reason. Take Amnesia and Soma as an example. Both are horror, puzzle-solving, walk-in simulators. Now, I like Soma and have absolutely no desire to play the Amnesia games at all. It all comes down to genre. Sci-fi just engages me on a different level than just straight-out horror. trying to figure out what's going on and seeing the possible future and technology that awaits us. It's just more mind stimulation from my point of view. Does that sound boring or interesting to you? Depends on what type of person you are. That difference will make the difference in how they experience the game. And in reality, I don't like your horror games. And as for Amnesia, it just doesn't appeal to me. Walking around, keeping the light on, I can see the appeal, the tension. It's probably more the fantasy I can't understand. This isn't going to happen in the real world. This could never happen. That just doesn't interest me at all. That's me. Some people like these horrifying supernatural mysteries with really no explanation for it. Sci-fi tends to have at least pseudo logic behind the technology and stories that they're involved in and theoretically could happen. Let me not rant on that too much. I would just rather have the option to fight back in games like that instead of doing the walking simulator. Probably why I'm both a fan of Dead Space and the Resident Evil franchise, even some of the more iffy ones like Resident Evil 6. Alan Wake is an example of something that gave me just enough control to fight back that I thought it was a decent game. Really weird writing. Some of the cutscenes were just out there, sort of like Control, but the gameplay overall, you gotta be in the right mind frame for some of these games, and other games you just won't like no matter what sort of state of mind you put yourself in. And yeah, I can't totally disagree with his commentary on Far Cry 6 and Last of Us 2. Some of his comments just seem to be standard rightoid culture warrior that just blinks red alert light. It makes me think he's just following a script, saying what all these other people do. If he would rephrase that with his own words, it probably would be more acceptable to me. Now, I understand the strength of having a sort of narrative of the rightoid cultural warrior that's out there. It unifies a lot of people with similar but different beliefs into a more direct message to reach the audience and for some crossover understanding. People are stupid. You keep the message stupid. You pick on other people, even though you might have more nuance. Sometimes that nuance gets lost in the weeds. It uses a broad brush that makes sweeping generalizations about things like, in Synthetic Man's case, universities.
And the other member of the couple is even worse. She's a psychotic bitch who thinks it's okay to kill people because they misgender your boyfriend. And I know at least one person's going to argue that I took context out of that scene because this blonde woman apparently ran some kind of academy for brainwashing people, which again just feels like pure projection on the developer's part, as we all know what ideology is being fed to people in American universities, at the very least.
All the students are brainwashed. Maybe they try. Not all the teachers do. Okay, now I got my BA in 2020, and why I did see many of the other students, not all the students, were being so-called brainwashed, more like just feeding into the narcissism the individual ones of them have, feeling special, and that culture gave them some personal feeling that they were better and greater and they were learning and crap like that. Just the stupid ones, pretty much, with really no sense of identity or personality of their own. Now, did Synthetic Man go to college or university? I don't know, but I'm guessing not. How would he know any of that? Did he just hear it from other people and believe it? Or did he have a lot of friends who went to college and lost touch from so-called brainwashing? Shit, I can at least say from first-hand experience, I had an old friend lost that way. Freaking dumbass just bathed himself in the glorious past, the nostalgia of our childhood, while at the same time thought he was so much better because he was like the president of his college and some bullshit like that. Why, I told him when we were talking, stop comparing fucking centrists to Nazis. It was goddamn annoying. He kept it up. He kept with that fucking fucking leftoid dumbass bullshit. I hate both sides, legitimately. I'm not gonna be a fucking grifter like he was talking about and say left or right. I think there needs to be a matter of nuance. I say people like that can go fuck right off. I can call out crazies on both the right and left equally. Now, I'm not gonna blame Synthetic Man too much for holding this opinion of his. As I said, conditioning of more the classical type, although it's not that simple, can work both ways. And the damn egotistical bread tubers of the olden days co-opting the media review space on YouTube and giving many people the impression that college turned people into brain-dead douchebags whose only skill seems to be able to convince other people to eat up their BS opinions that has so much weight because they have a freaking piece of paper. And a lot of people actually fall for that bullshit. Sorry about that brief rant. Okay, back on topic.
It is a shame when you have a game like A Hat in Time, which on the surface, you're just playing as a little girl in a collectathon 3D platformer adventure, and it's a great game. I'd recommend it to anybody who's a fan of the genre. But of course, there is a trans flag in the game. And look, I've now had to cut 2 rants too edgy for YouTube about this specific issue.
I do understand why Synthetic Man might let a little thing like the trans flag and In a Hat in Time bother him to the extent that it does, given a bunch of people got outrage over a mod for one of the Spider-Man games that turned all the trans flags into American flags in the game. And then I believe that modder got kicked off from the website he posted it on. Little bullshit. I just don't want to be like the leftoids who gets triggered over everything.
So I'll just try and put it as plainly as possible. At best, this is widely misplaced virtue signaling, which is completely worthless. It means nothing, but at least Twitter can be happy, right? And at worst, it's grooming, plain and simple. This is a game for children. And yes, it is mainly enjoyed by man-children and likely a lot of trans women who want to be children or have relations with children. But it does not belong in a kid-friendly game, period.
Yeah, maybe it was a virtue signal and had a time to pander to the progressives. Or maybe it was a meaningful symbol to someone who worked at the game. My thought process is, if I let these little sorts of bullshit bother me, then the idiots on the left win. So I see this sort of shit, and I'm just like, okay. And then I move on. I'm not gonna let a freaking trans flag trigger me because that's what some people want. And yeah, there are some trans douchebags grooming children and trying to create a femboy army or some crap like that. But painting all trans people that way because they have some really messed up people in their group is like painting every Christian like they're the Westboro Baptist Church, or all conservatives like they're fucking all neo-Nazi fascists, like a lot of freaking leftoids try to do. They're all assholes.
And Signalis, which although I think is an awesome game, my second favorite game of last year, at the end of the day, it's about space lesbians. Talk about kneecapping your psychological horror story where in the end, it's about lesbian love.
Come on, Synthetic Man. Really? A lesbian couple in the game you like and you see that as a woke move? Oh, maybe it is. I don't know. Didn't play that game. But seriously, I guess the days of straight males finding lesbian couples hot is dead.
This is what I'm trying to tell you guys. I could probably come up with like a million examples from the past 5 or 6 years especially. But it just feels like it's impossible to escape people's ideology anymore. It's not that older games didn't have political undertones. Of course they did. A lot of games people love have huge political undertones, like BioShock, right? It's just that the nature of the politics have become so cringe and quite literally gay.
Sure. As for the political points he's making, people just conflate politics with the values they hold. Or should I say the opinions about the best way the world you live should work and how that should be ran in theory. Some more traditional, stable theories that's kept this world moving along for so many years, or newer ideas to improve the world we live in. I understand the appeal of both of them. One's stable, one might improve things dramatically. Still, opinions are like assholes. Everyone has them. Judge them differently. There are different values among different people. Yet politics tends to be the most dumbed down version of those values that people tend to hold as a group for a purpose, on purpose. Thinking about it, it sucks just being an individual with your own thoughts and feelings. In that position, unless you're powerful or rich, it's hard to change things in this world. So most people sort of just sacrifice their individual values to find a closely aligned group to sort of pin their hopes on and see sort of a watered down version of those values become some sort of reality, or at least a mindset among a greater number of people in the world. Frankly, it just seems like a lost cause to me. I'm not going to join any group. I'm an individual and my interest is just lies in whatever, but that's just me. Subjective point of view. I would rather hold on to my individual values and deal with other people of a similar mindset who can accept people with different opinions and live in the reality that we exist in, instead of longing for the socialist utopia or maybe the right-eyed proud nationalist state. Now, maybe I don't think I will change the world with this opinion of mine. Centrist people in the middle tend to get crushed by the idiots on the other two sides, even by some of the smarter ones. I will admit both right and left has some smart people, but they tend not to be the loudest and they tend to be in the minority. So I'm just gonna live my life associating with people who can actually communicate with me. In reality, the conclusion I came to is change what I can change. At this point, it's myself and those close to me who I value like family and friends. Those should never be taken for granted. You should value those relationships. No matter who you are, I would like to see that expressed a little bit more, but as I said, I won't push my values on other people. I will either just mock or try to convince them with my words. Maybe with a little bit of pizzazz and jazz and a little bit of mockery here and there. So basically, I just go around thinking, doing what I try to find enjoyable and right when I can, even if it's not understandable to other people. I really don't hope to hurt too many people in really whatever I do in life, and that's really the best I can hope for. Still, I'm not going to go out of my way to not hurt people because pain is a part of living. If you worry about receiving it or sort of causing it on other people, you and the people around you will never learn to grow from the experience. And that's probably the flaw with a lot of these pleasure-seeking utopian people who can't accept other people's have a point of view. I really don't think that's Synthetic Man. I'm not saying that's him. I'm saying he's fallen into that trap, that he's some special snowflake who sees through all this bullshit. I don't think he does. He might see a small portion of it and horribly misconstrues it, and I can't even blame him for it because I can get a lot of what he's saying. I can understand a lot of the points he's making. I just don't think it's optimally smart to really disenfranchise those people. Some people you need to say fuck, but some people you can reach. And the way he does it, he's gonna exclude certain people and pull people to him with not the best motives, at least in my opinion. And with that, I'm done.